Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My role on the Provost Colloquium Committee is one of my favorite roles on campus. I love to see all the proposals come through, and tonight's proposal was a great one, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Since we do have 4 speakers tonight, instead of giving a detailed bio for each of them, I just picked the very best bits. So here's a best of. Our first speaker, James Hunt, is an associate professor of biology at East Stroudsburg University. Jay's research focuses on the behavior and ecology of deep sea organisms and the impacts of climate change on our oceans. Winner of the Outstanding Researcher of the Year Award by the Plankton Society of Japan in 1999, Dr. Hunt once tried unsuccessfully to order a high-speed train ticket from a ramen noodle vending machine. Jerry Ross is an associate professor of physics at East Stroudsburg University, where his work focuses on air breathing and deep space propulsion technologies such as turbojets, Hall thrusters, and DC plasma arc thrusters, and has won multiple grants in support of such work. Professor Ross was notably first-place winner of the losers bracket of the 1993 Boy Scouts of America Pinewood Derby, having missed out on winners bracket competition because of his inability to show up on time. Michael Doherty is professor and chair of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at East Stroudsburg University, an institution that he has served since 1989. Preceding his arrival at ESU, he underperformed in chemistry and music at Wabash College, earned mixed recommendations from his undergraduate professors, was threatened with expulsion from the PhD program in chemistry at Indiana University, spent nearly 2 years on failed research projects during graduate study at Purdue, and yet ultimately persevered and succeeded with a research project of his own design. In athletic contests past, Dr. Doherty has been swept from the field of battle by his own teammates for placing spectacularly last in swimming, wrestling, and basketball events, and was subbed into the last 7 seconds of a 35-7 football game by an assistant coach exclaiming, "All third stringers in, even Doherty." Bonnie Green is a professor of psychology at East Stroudsburg University with over $4.5 million in grant funding and with the majority of her grant proposals unfunded. Her research focuses on the science of success, and in this capacity has worked with undergraduates for 12 years on developing a measurement protocol that is no closer to success today than it was 12 years ago. Labeled as just not that bright by her second grade teacher, unlikely to graduate from college by her high school English teacher, and unlikely to ever get a job as a teacher by her student teaching supervisor, she fortunately failed to live up to these expectations as well and has been teaching at ESU since 2004. So without further delay, I give you tonight's panel of experts on failure, the secret to success.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to have you here. So I am Bonnie Green. I'm in the psychology department, and I conduct research along with colleagues across the university and at other universities in the science of success. And so we're going to be talking to you today about success and the importance that failure holds in success. I don't have to hold this? Oh, great. Thank you. These are just some pictures of people that I know who have been successful in lots of different ways. Some are artists, some are athletes, some are successful in the military, some just are successful at being a great mom. Any type of success you go about, it doesn't matter. There seems to be a series of patterns that successful people all tend to do. They establish a visionary goal that aligns with their higher purpose. This is one of those things in our area of research that we're only really fully starting to understand. And it's interesting because if you look out in the literature on establishing goals, you'll start to see that some people are saying, wait a minute, goals aren't enough. And sometimes goals can be constraining. But as we're looking at this, it isn't just enough to establish a goal, it's to have that higher purpose for that goal, to understand who are you, why are you here? Successful people have grit, and they're not too afraid to fail. You know? I stop and I think about the provost colloquium, and I was at that very first meeting with the provost and a handful of faculty as we were talking about, could this work? And if this did work, how long would it take for us to get it up and running? And there was this sense of, well, if we try, what happens if we fail? And I'm not going to lie. The thought of being classified as incompetent or an embarrassment crossed my mind. And so it's not that when you're successful that you're not afraid to fail, but you're not too afraid to fail. Successful people establish a plan to leverage what they've got. And this is not having your mother bribe somebody to get you into college. That is not a successful path. But they leverage what they've got. This is the next part. So I already said you're not afraid to fail, but you're also not afraid to fail publicly. You actively seek truthful feedback and you use it. One of the reasons why I was told that I would never graduate from from college, is because my high school English teacher said I wrote like a second grader. I was in 12th grade, and he said this very publicly, and it really weighed on me. So I went to college, and I explicitly selected a college where writing wasn't expected. So I went to Penn State. There was no writing except in my English composition class. Students, do not do this. I used my high school composition and turned them in for college. I didn't even write anything for the class. I never took any feedback. I never did anything. I didn't want to know, because I was convinced I sucked as a writer, and I would always suck as a writer. Fortunately for me, because sometimes there is a little bit of luck in here, fortunately for me on the GREs, there was not a writing section for the GREs. There was an analytical section, which I rocked. And I got into graduate school, and I was doing a great job. And then I got called aside by my statistics professor. And I'm thinking, I'm great at statistics. This is great. He's going to tell me how wonderful I am and how everybody loves me. And I was an exceptional teaching assistant. I knew that. And he looked at me and he goes, Bonnie, if your writing doesn't improve in the next year, we will be asking you to leave with a master's degree. And I looked at him and I said, I've always sucked at writing. I'll always suck at writing. I can't get any better. And he said to me, writing is like riding a bicycle. It's just a skill. You just have to practice. But this is where the difference was. I actively sought out truthful feedback. I went to see him once a week. The department decided that he was going to be my writing mentor. I went to see him once a week with my writing. And he would tear it apart, and I would sit there and I would cry. I'm talking tears rolling down my face. And like a good statistics professor like he was, he completely ignored my emotions and continued to provide me with feedback. But I didn't just seek the feedback, I used it. And each week I'd try to get better at my writing, and each week I'd try to get better at my writing. And about like 3 months in, he turns to me and he goes, Bonnie, you're getting better at your writing. And I'm like, yes, how do you know? And he goes, because you're not crying as much. Look, I don't actively seek accurate feedback on lots of things. I love to dance. I love to sing. Do not tell me if I'm good at dancing or singing. Just pretend I am and let's be done with it. But if you really want to be an expert at something, you have to be willing to sit there even when it stabs you in the heart to get that accurate feedback. And you need to be ready to use it. Right? So, Dr. Elwood was kind enough not to tell you exactly how many millions of dollars I have tried to get from NSF and have been told no. I think I'm up at, I gave you the accurate number. Do you have it?
I think you said something like 8.5 to 9.
$8.5 to $9 million. They have said no to me. And every time I get a no, okay, I get a little pissy. And I push it aside, and I stay grumpy for 2 days. But then I pull up what they say, and I read through it, and I systematically look at it, right? Successful people actively seek truth, actively seek truthful feedback and use it. The last part is probably one of the most important for our students. I do not know why people want to hold other people back. It does not make any sense to me, right? I research success. I want everybody to be successful. But the truth of the matter is that there are people out there who will try to hold you back, sometimes unconsciously, other times more overtly. But successful people do not let other people hold them back. So let's talk a little bit more. When you establish that visionary goal that is aligned with your higher purpose, why are you here? You need to make sure that it's something for which you're driven, right? My parents wanted me to be an engineer. I was good in math and science. They never went to college. People who were good in math and science were engineers. I should be an engineer. It wasn't what I was driven for. My father was beside himself when I said, I want to teach and I want to study how people can learn. Why? You could be an engineer. But you have to find something that you're driven for. And you have to think about your visionary goal. Like, why are you here? Are you motivated? And does your goal really align with your higher purpose? Right now, I know my students hate when I do this, but you guys are all going to do this. What I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you and tell them, what is your higher purpose? Why are you on this earth? Go ahead. What's your higher purpose?
Oh man. To do good.
To do good? What does that mean? How are you going to know that you've done well?
People tell me that I had made an impact.
You want to make an impact on the lives of others. Yeah. Yes.
We're having trouble hearing you in the back.
Okay, I'll speak louder. What's your higher purpose?
I don't know.
Spend some time reflecting. What's your higher purpose? To teach, yes. All right. I heard I need to be a little bit louder. I can do that. So I heard around that some people's higher purpose was to make an impact on this world, to make life better for other people, to teach, right? To be a speech pathologist, to help students feel good about science. One of the things that we know from working with students from underprepared and underserved environments is that they don't always know what their higher purpose is, and they don't establish goals. And when that happens, they're actually more likely to end up in prison than they are to end up in graduate school. And so we need to really pay attention to this. By the way, my higher purpose when I was little was to be an astronaut. Actually, approximately 80% of all PhD scientists who are in my generation wanted to be astronauts, didn't you? No?
That one didn't cross my mind.
No? Okay. Successful people have grit and aren't too afraid to fail. So grit is the tendency to sustain to a long-term goal. Guess what? You can't have grit if you don't have a goal, right? So if you look at the research on this, there are a lot of people who are saying grit doesn't work in elementary school or high school and the research is oversold. No. They're going to people seeing if they have grit. They're not checking to see if they have goals. And I'm telling you already, they don't have the goals. You have to have the goal. You have to have the elevated purpose. You have to have that internal feel. But with that, once you have that, then you can have that zeal. You can have that drive. You can have that focused effort towards a goal and persevere even when people say you're not going to be successful. Right? We know that grit predicts academic achievement, grit predicts survival in military training, specifically at Parris Island, an unpleasant place to be, and even spelling bee success. Successful people establish a plan. They leverage what they've got. Again, you might see some things in the literature that talk about deliberate practice not really summing it up properly, or 10,000 hours aren't enough. Well, first of all, that 10,000-hour deliberate practice statement was a myth. Nobody ever said that who was doing the research. It's not just a number of hours. I can trust me, I have sung for 10,000 hours or more. I have danced. I've done a lot of things. I've cooked for 10,000 hours. That doesn't make me an expert. That doesn't make me successful. Right? You have to not just practice, but figure out what you're going to do. Come up with that plan, when you're going to do it, who is going to be your go-to team, right? You leverage what you've got. And you need to be honest with it. My mother is a delightfully loving person who is always in my corner cheering me on, except when she isn't. I know when it's time to go to mom and when it's time to go to one of my friends. Right? You have to identify that go-to team. Successful people actively seek truthful feedback. I told you how hard it was. I think that next to staying pregnant, which, by the way, the doctor said that I'd never have any children, and I have two, so I didn't listen to them there either. Except for staying pregnant, which was absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The next hardest thing I've ever done in my life was learning how to write as a graduate student. It was awful. And I just published my 4th book. So I've learned how to write, but it wasn't pleasant. You have to seek truthful feedback, and you need to have a keen sense of your own metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. You need to involve others in that assessment process, right? And use that information. I never paid attention to anything my English composition professor said my freshman year. And after that, I literally never had to write another paper for the rest of my time as an undergraduate. I know, for those of you that came from small schools, you're like, how does that happen? All you do is you pick the classes with 600 students. You know there's not going to be a paper in that. Plus some of those easier classes like programming, there's no papers in those either. So hey, one of the things is that we said, so this is research that my undergraduates did. We were looking to see, could we help people understand about cognitive biases, right? So we have all of these cognitive biases that really keep us from seeing the truth, which is why we have to involve others in it. And so what my undergraduates did was came up with definitions of each of these cognitive biases. I only picked 3 of them. And they gave the students the definitions of confirmation bias, which is this idea that once you have a belief, you look for information to prove yourself right? Something that scientists don't do. But that confirmation bias, when they described it and they asked undergraduates, do others have confirmation bias? They said, oh yeah, others have confirmation bias. When they asked them, do you do this? Initially, they all said no. And then we told them, no, really, there's research that everybody does this. And then you could see it didn't quite, that's a statistically significant difference still, that it didn't quite get to where they saw with other people. but it was at least a little bit better. The same thing happened with the blind spot bias. That is that you're not seeing something that contradicts something that you believe to be true, right? So if you believe something to be true and there's contradictory information over here, you're blind to it. But the ostrich effect was hysterical because we actually saw an ostrich effect. So an ostrich effect is that when you tell people about their cognitive limitations, their biases, they put their heads in the sand. Or when you tell them about something that's negative, they put their head in the sand, right? Ostrich effect. And so you could see they're like, oh yeah, lots of people ignore when I try to tell them the truth about themselves. And they're like, but I really don't. And then when we said, yes, everybody does, they put their head in their sands. No, not me. So we got the ostrich effect with that. Because we have these cognitive biases, we know as successful people we need to involve others in that evaluation of us. But last but not least, successful people do not let others hold them back. But this is hard. And this is the area right now where my team is doing the most amount of research. We actually have stumbled upon something that we thought was a variable, but now looks more like a script, and we're not quite sure what's going on. That kind of explains all of this. But what we know is that when a person has an elevated purpose, it kind of acts as a buffer to when other people tell you you can't, right? In fact, one set of data that we have that led us to even studying this section was we collected it on a fluke. I don't even remember what the actual study was. And a group of students said, hey, we were collecting data on GPA and stuff like that, I know that. The students said, hey, let's collect religiosity. How important is religion in day-to-day life to see if it's, if it matters? And I'm like, okay, right, the students asked. I figured, why not? There's no literature that supported this. And lo and behold, we found one of the highest correlations on GPA and religiosity, but not for people who were represented within the group, only for people who were in unrepresented populations. And so as we were looking at this, and it took us a while to move around, this was probably 12 years ago. It took us a good 10 years to come to this idea that, is it religion? Is it something else? And what it is elevated purpose, which religion could be a part of, but doesn't necessarily have to be. We know that people who are high in optimism, high in gratitude, that helps buffer other people from holding them back. Stereotype threat, which I could talk about for forever, is another more complicated thing, but being aware of stereotype threat will protect you as well. For those of you from underrepresented student populations, please, 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 please read Whistling Vivaldi to learn more about stereotype threat. Trust me when I say it will help you be a better student. And the last one, compassion. It appears that having compassion protects us from the negativity of other people. And so we have a whole bunch of other stuff that we're doing. If you want to know more about my research, you can take a look and follow me on Open Science Framework. If you just Google Open Science Framework and Bonnie Green, you can find all kinds of research measures and stuff that we're working on. I do have a success playlist, and if anybody has any songs that they think should go on that playlist. By the way, my favorite success songs aren't up there because they have bad language, but those are the ones without bad language. All right, so thank you. I don't think anything else is needed. Okay.
So my role today is as the discussant. So we're going to be asking for a few questions. I have some as well. As the only non-tenured person of this committee, it was suggested that maybe I shouldn't be announcing all of my failures just yet. So just for today, we're all going to pretend that I'm perfect and never failed, which is a bold-faced lie. But the first question I had, Bonnie, I wanted to start things off, about the grit and not being afraid. For those people that might think, I'm just not that person, I just don't have the grit or whatnot, do you have any advice for them?
Oh, that is a good question. First of all, none of the variables that I study are variables that you're born with, right? A long time ago, I decided, why bother to study stuff we can't change, right? I want to study success. So I want to study things we can change. And grit actually is something that we can change. If you haven't experienced grit yet, my guess is that you probably haven't found that passion. And so for those of you who are in my first year experience class, they can tell everybody what I do. The first half of the semester we spend reflecting on ourselves. Ourselves as people, ourselves as students, ourselves as students at ESU. And so my recommendation would be is if you don't see grit in your life, step back and take a look at yourself. Spend time with yourself. And that's really hard because when you're going to school and you're worried about money and you're trying to get your assignments done, a lot of times we almost lose track of ourselves. I know I did. And so that would be the first thing. But trust me when I say grit is trainable, grit is doable. Anybody can do it, but if you don't have that higher purpose, if you don't have that goal, how are you going to persevere towards it?
Does anybody else have any quick questions? Well, Jonathan.
When you were coming to the conclusion that it was like the higher purpose, that was what you guys associated with the religiosity correlation.
Yes.
How did you make that determination as opposed to say like maybe an organized routine or a sense of community or?
Well, feelings of belonging actually are one of the variables associated with success. So feeling like you belong in an environment is critical. And so that is a fabulous question. We actually have 6 domains for our larger theory, 3 at the organizational level, 3 at the individual level, right? All of the domains have between 7 and 20 variables. So there's well over 70 variables. We are in the process of investigating 3 brand new ones that aren't even out in the literature. And so that's kind of where we are. But what we came up with, we did this very systematically. First of all, we looked at what was in the literature. We worked with research labs that were doing success, like up at NYU and other institutions. We looked at the research that we were doing, but we did what's called focus group data. So we brought in people and we asked them, why are you successful? And it's interesting because some of the data that we collected, I collected 10 years ago. I collected 12 years ago for different purposes, but we were asking people, what is causing you to be successful? And so we went back to take a look. And when we went back to take a look and we started looking for it, we started seeing it. The other place that we see is actually, which is one of the reasons why I have the playlist, in some of these new variables that we've been identifying, we first look to see, are they in music, right? Because if the variable actually exists that people are going to be successful, one of our new variables is called oppositional mindset. And so it's this belief that when somebody tells you you can't, but you still do, and you use that as, hey, you know, I've got this, and forget you. We looked for it in songs, and so like one of the modern songs, Thunder, Hear the Thunder, boom, 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 lightning and thunder, that song, there he's like, I'm down here on the stage and you're up in the nosebleeds. And we have this oppositional mindset definition within the music. So that's kind of where we are. Where we're going next is we create quantitative measures, but like Dr. Elwood said, there are limitations to our measures, and we're really working to try to get around them. And it's not like I'm working to try to get around them. Everybody in my field is trying to work to get around them. But we're working to quantify that, and then we can move forward. So that's kind of where we are. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Peter.
I had a question about elevated purpose, which I think you convinced us is so important. And,
Yes.
And 2 questions related on this. One is, have you thought about whether something counts as elevated or not? I mean, imagine if I talk to somebody who says, what do you want to do? I want to be a Harvard professor. That's what I want to do. I want to get to Harvard. And someone else says, I want to feel like, I think about myself as I know some stuff and other people I respect say so too. And I could see how the latter would give me a lot of grit, but if I said my goal is to get to Harvard, once I run across a couple of serious roadblocks, I don't know that grit is going to come out of that kind of purpose.
And that's a fabulous point. And we aren't quite there yet to separate that out. However, it is our sense, like we know when people strive for money, there's plenty of research on this. When you strive for money, it doesn't get you to the same place as when you strive for purpose. And so if you strive for status, and so that Harvard position is probably more striving for status, it doesn't get you as far as if you strive for purpose. And so, but there's so much to be understood in this area.
Just a quick follow-up about grades. Do you think grades in college get in the way or help?
So, empirically, students who care about grades get better grades. That having been said, I think anything that a professor does to maximize intellectual engagement is going to have a much longer and better impact than grades.
How do you delineate between purpose and goals?
So purpose is more like your personal vision, where goal would be something articulated that you can accomplish. So and I guess that's kind of what Peter was alluding to. So my purpose is to better understand success in a manner that it can be used to assist people in vulnerable situations, right? But then I do have goals specifically related to figuring out how to reduce recidivism or increase the use of assessment in public health in impoverished environments and so forth and so on. So that purpose is that larger piece, and then it would break down into more specific actionable goals.
To build on what they were talking about the goal building, do you have any recommendations on how people should design their goals? Because if we look back at some of your stories, if you had said, this is my goal, a lot of the people in the past in your life might have said, that's ridiculous, that's not a reasonable goal. So how do people go about deciding what is a reasonable goal and what isn't in that regard?
Wow. That is a tough question. You know, sometimes you just have to try it out. And, you know, I wanted to be an astronaut. And it caused me to take all kinds of science and math classes in high school, that made me feel very comfortable in doing that in college. And I didn't even know that there was something called experimental psychology. And yet, this is where I ended up. And so I think one of the things that for college students you should do is you have a fabulous asset in the form of your faculty. And I think talking with your faculty makes an awful lot of sense to help with establishing maybe more shorter term goals to move forward. So, so if you're unsure, talk with your faculty. And you guys can come talk to me, I talk to anybody. Okay.
I think it's an interesting discussion about goals, because when I reflect on my life, and for those who don't know, I'm the Dean of the College of Health Sciences. I'm Denise Seigard. I did not plan to be a dean. I never set that as a goal. And I think I could say that about a lot of things in my life. What has been better for me is to be open to opportunities. So I knew I wanted to go to college, for example, and I started in nursing because nurses could get jobs.
Right.
And I was being very practical. And I don't regret that decision, but then I had many other opportunities after becoming a nurse, so I've done many other things. So I would not say necessarily that I had an elevated goal of being a professor or being a dean. But what I did have was a lot of curiosity, energy, and the desire to do new things.
Right.
And-
And so, and in that case, that was your elevated purpose. For some people, just simply seeking knowledge and being intellectually engaged is their purpose. And the beautiful thing, because one of the things people ask me about success is, how do you define success? And I said, I don't. You do. And so however you choose to define success is fine. I don't define success. Nothing in our research tries to define success. What we are trying to do, though, is understand what variables we can teach people and help people and mentor people, especially people in vulnerable populations and vulnerable situations, so that they can move forward towards a path that they go, yeah, this is good. So we should probably go to the next.
I was just going to say, we'll definitely have time for questions more at the end. But next, I'd like to bring up Dr. Jay Hunt. And I'll go ahead and take that down. Do you want a pointer or anything?
No, I don't need a pointer. I'm just going to talk to people. So I'm Jay Hunt. I direct the Marine Science program here at ESU, and I don't research success. And I think my role here is because when Bonnie was putting this talk together, she said, now who has to have a lot of experience failing? I know, Jay. Not that she was wrong. In fact, I had a little trouble deciding what I was going to talk about, not because I couldn't come up with an example of failure, but because I couldn't decide which one, which one I'm going to talk about. But I came up with one that I think will illustrate maybe some of Bonnie's points. I never thought of it in terms of grit. I always thought perseverance, but grit's a great word for it. So I'm going to go on a limb and say that I'm probably the only person you've ever met or will meet who's had a fish die of smoke inhalation. It's not easy to do if you think about it, right? Because they live under the water. And so it is also true, this is going to sound arrogant, but this is also true that 20 years ago, I became the deepest diving American biologist in history. I've been 6,513 meters under the ocean. Very few people have done that. I didn't know about it until I came up and people told me about it. But the thing is, in thinking about it, one event directly led to the other like a series of dominoes falling. So I went to graduate school at UCLA, and I decided I wanted to study schooling behavior, group behavior. How do groups of animals make decisions? Who's the leader? Who's the follower? How does a flock know when to start flying, when to make a turn? This really kind of fascinated me, and I told my advisor about it, and he said, that's great. Why don't you build a setup to do that? We'll go get some fish, we'll put them in a tank, we'll videotape them, and we'll measure things like the angular acceleration and the speed and the turning, all of that. And I saw it sounded fun. So 18 months of really hard work in graduate school, including getting a grant I had to build the tank because you can't just buy what was a 2-meter wide circular tank that was only about 6 inches tall. And I had to, go out to Catalina Island, scuba dive, get the fish, bring them back to UCLA, transport them in, get another little grant so I could get a camera to put it on the roof so I could videotape the fish. 18 months into it, I'm just starting to collect data. Things are going okay. I've got my tank, I've got my camera, I'm starting to get information on it. And I'm starting to feel good about myself. Maybe I can do this graduate school thing after all. And I came in to UCLA, came in the building, and the first 2 people, I kid you not, the first 2 people both did one of these. That was a little weird. The third person I bumped into was one of the professors, not my major advisor, but he said, Jay, are you just getting in? I said, uh-huh. He goes, well, you need to go downstairs immediately. And I thought, oh boy, I don't know what happened, but that doesn't sound good. So I walked downstairs, and there's 2 police, there's crime scene tape around my door, and there's a fire marshal there, and I'm not allowed to go into the room, and I gotta be whisked into a room and answer a bunch of questions, and I'm panicked because I don't know what's going on. The long story short, there was a fire in the lab, And by the time I was allowed to go in, I had my bass up at the surface with his gills were black, which is not really a funny story, but he did die of smoke inhalation. So that is a true story. I was miserable. I was upset. I'm 24 years old. I just wasted a year and a half of my life. This is what I'm thinking. I hate this. Grad school is hard. I don't want to start all over again. Grad school sucks. I don't want to be here. I'm going to go back to New York. I hate California. I suck. All of this is just cascading through because, I didn't want to start over again. I didn't have the money. So what am I going to do? On top of that, it took 10 days of being miserable, wondering, did I screw up? Did I leave something off on? Did I not connect wires correctly? Did I start the fire? 10 days it took them to clear me of the fire. What ended up happening was an air pump shorted out, caught fire. One of those little cheesy air pumps caught the plastic hose on fire, actually caught the wood cabinet on fire, which got so hot it ruptured an acrylic aquarium that put the fire out. It could have been much worse. Fortunately for me, it was not my fault. Your purse is calling you. So anyway, I'm still miserable about this, and I think because my advisor realized I was so upset, as sort of a consolation prize and to keep me from maybe dropping out or doing something silly like that, he said, well, listen, go up to this place. I'm an adjunct to this place, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. They've got deep sea subs and they take videotapes, and maybe you can find some schools there. You said you were interested in squid schooling originally. Why don't you go see if you can find some videotape there and work on that? I said, okay. So I went up to Monterey, and I go in and I introduce myself and I get trained on how to use this, and they tell me, that's great, come back at 10 o'clock tonight because graduate students don't get to actually work during the day. That's when real researchers work. I had the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. So I went in and got into the database and I typed in a bunch of different things, nothing worked, and finally I just typed in the word squid. And the people my age and older will get this, but there was a dot matrix printer on tractor feed, which meant that it's printing out the video records of all the squid, and it's going zzz, 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 zzz. That's one line. Roll. 53 pages of records of squid they had. So 2 in the morning, 2:30, 3 in the morning, it's still feeding out. Finally, I get the thing. There's no information on it. I don't know what the schooling is. So I start pulling off things and I'm starting to look at them. Now, because I was a graduate student, I'd already been investigating squid because I knew that's kind of what I wanted to work on, squid schooling. And I didn't find a lot of schooling shots, but what I found were live images or recorded video images of deep sea squids that had never been seen alive before. And I knew that because I'd already done the work to study. So we had species descriptions and what they looked like when they came up dead in a net. But here they were interacting with other animals, hunting, being hunted, and that just caught me. And I said, this is crazy. They have this gold mine of information and nobody's working on it. So I went back to UCLA and said, this is what I want to do. Right? So flash forward, it took another 4 years, but I became the first person to use a submersible database to get your PhD. I had to kind of figure out how to get the information. That led to a job in Japan, where I famously don't know how to order ramen noodles or train tickets, or they're both. But 34 bio grad students came into UCLA the year I came in. 2 of us finished. I am not the smartest of the 34. I guarantee it. I knew these guys and girls. I don't think I was special in any way other than that I was not going to give up. I was going to finish. Whatever it took, I was going to finish. Even when I was upset, I knew at some point I was going to finish. I didn't know if I was going to do anything with it. I didn't know if I was going to be employable. I didn't know if anybody would hire anybody that studies squid, deep sea squid on a videotape. I had no clue. But I wasn't going to stop. That was it. I had that goal. The goal was to get the doctorate. That's what I was going to do. So that's my story. If I didn't have the fish die of smoke inhalation, I literally wouldn't have had the career I had today. And so I guess the only message, if there's a message for you when you're young, is maybe a couple of things. One, I know this is going to sound like you can't believe it, but when you're in your teens and your 20s and 18 months seems like an eternity, it's really not. You can start over after an 18-month or 2-year stumble. Yeah, you know, it sucks, but you can do it. The second thing is, when you get those situations that look like, especially for your career, they look like they're a sidetrack, they're a problem, you never know where they're going to go. You just don't. And so somebody mentioned opportunities. Take the opportunities that come and see what's behind those doors and then just keep going. Because that's it. What I tell my students all the time is, and it sounds paradoxical or oxymoronic or maybe just moronic, I don't know. But if you give up, that's it, you're done. So those are your choices. You give up or you don't give up. That's all.
So Jay, one of the questions I had is thinking about this and also some of my experiences as a grad student. I ran into the situation that your project died, literally died in this particular case. So many times when we run into those situations, we hold on to that. How can I still make this work? How can I still make this work? And how can I make this work? As opposed to abandoning it, just straight up abandoning it and moving on. And a lot of times I feel like that people don't necessarily look at that other option. They think, no, I have to make something out of this. So I was curious if you had any advice for the audience on when you're in that situation, when should you let it go? When should you just move on? When should you still fight for what?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think what I'd say about it is when something like that happened, I know what you're saying. I didn't want to let it go because you spend so much time doing it. But at that moment, I didn't want to ever do it again. I knew I was probably going to want to come back to it. I thought I was going to want to come back to it. But what ends up happening is, in that time, I found something else I like more. So I'm not sure that I would say just abandon something if it doesn't go right. I think maybe you could have. If I didn't see what I saw up in Monterey, I probably would have gone back and rebuilt the system and tried to redesign it and work on it again. But at that moment, my initial gut feeling was, I don't want to do this anymore. And so that maybe made me a little open to other possibilities, maybe.
Well, an answer to your question in my own circumstances, when I had some projects in grad school that I was most of 2 years in and nothing, and it's 19 years before this could ever get anywhere, one of the things that I did was overcome my general reluctance to seek outside help from professionals. So I went to the University Counseling Service. I got your ordinary vanilla counseling service professional, and it only took 3 sessions before she said, well, it sounds to me like you have a thing that can't be done in 19 years, so have you considered option B? Well, I guess that's a pretty good idea. Thanks. So the 4th week I didn't go back, and that was over. But, seeking the assessment, the input, the other eyeballs of other people, like she said, can really be helpful at a time like that. Was for me, certainly.
Anybody else have any questions? Donovan?
So how long after, you initially walked in the lab, oh no, everything's gone, so how long did that emotional setback put you until you were able to?
It's been about 38 years right now. So honestly, I was miserable for weeks. When I started thinking about changing over to the deep sea stuff, I got excited again. So it kind of went away because I grabbed onto that. And it took another, in 6 months I was living up in Monterey doing that work. So it was a tough, especially those 10 days of not knowing if I caused the fire or, was my career over, was I going to get in trouble? It was all that stuff. It was not only career ending, it could have been personally really bad for me if I was responsible for the fire. Fortunately, that wasn't it. So a few weeks at least, a couple of months.
Layla.
How willing, I know you said as an example, I forget the place where you went to get your data, but it started with an M.
Monterey.
Okay. How willing are institutions like that, like other science institutions like that, willing to share? Because you said you just went Squid and took all the data. Like, how willing are they to share all their data?
So Monterey was a little bit of a weird place. I'm going to answer this in two quick ways. One is, I think it happens more than you might think it does, at least in my field. I think there's a misconception that scientists are all clustered away and we only want to talk about our own. And there's a little bit of wanting to be first. And I need to publish, so I need to have my stuff out there first. But there's also, I want to share with people. I want to collaborate with people. I want to work with other scientists from different disciplines, my own disciplines. So there's more willingness than you might think, first. Second, Monterey was this weird place where it was set up by David and Lucille Packard Foundation from Hewlett-Packard fame. And part of their charter was you are going to make your data public. You are going to make it available for education. And so I think the researchers have a certain time period they can work with. But if nobody's got claim to it, it's open. You know, if somebody wants to come in and work on it.
And that's what Open Science Framework is. It's an initiative explicitly to share data and share research methods and share measurements for free for everybody. And and it's not just experimental psychologists who are using Open Science Framework.
There's tons of data available online these days, which you didn't have the advantage of that in those days, but now you guys have tremendous opportunities to gather data. And in fact, ESU students are contributing to a big database on the Delaware Water River system and all of that right now. And it's a big open national database on the health of rivers and streams. And so the data's there. If you got a passion to study something, find a professor and get yourself moving.
There's so many different things too, like even like in other fields, like Galaxy Zoo. I remember when that started up a while ago. You can help people find star systems and things like that. So a place I used to work at, the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, they have actual fusion tokamak research data that comes out of it, Langmuir probe data. I mean, you've got to know a lot of plasma physics to know what you're looking at, but nevertheless, they put all of that out there available for people to look at, see if you can analyze, see if you can come up with anything. So yeah, there's a lot of options in a lot of different fields.
Interestingly enough, I was just at a meeting in Harrisburg, and PASHE is going to be opening up its data on student success, although they haven't determined what the protocol is going to be for you to write to get it. So in a lot of cases, to get the data, you have to propose a hypothesis and justify that you are in the position to take this data and do something with it. But that actually is supposed to be coming soon for all of the students in PASHE.
Yep. So next up, we have Dr. Michael Doherty from the chemistry department.
And if Dr. Green would put back up your lead slide, while I was watching that, I thought, man, that kind of overlies everything I'm going to be saying.
Just hit B.
So I'll start off by pointing out that I am not a researcher and a scholar expert on failure, such as Dr. Green is. Although we could put that in opposite terms, I'm not a scholar on success in the fashion that she is. So a thing you need to know about my story is a little bit about what I was like as a kid. I was successful. That didn't matter. That didn't matter. Successful. So I was successful in a lot of domains. I was the first male to get a trophy in the Catholic Youth Organization pie baking contest. Won speech contests and drama stuff and music and et cetera. And then I played football, and so clearly football is something that doesn't matter and it's irrelevant because I'm just, look at the evidence here. I'm not doing so good, so it doesn't matter. So that was my generalized mindset heading into college and heading into grad school, that there are things that I'm successful at and things that don't matter. And so it was a pretty good boundary there, and it worked for me, and it worked for me, and it worked for me in all domains except my love life. But my beautiful, charming wife told me I'm not allowed to talk about my love life before meeting her, which is when actually success. But, prior to that, stories. But that was one domain in which my it doesn't matter didn't really work for me. And the other one was my scholarly life in grad school. So as an undergrad, I was pretty bright, and so I could kind of titrate, and I could do enough work to make sure I got my B+ or better, whatever. And the passion that she was talking about, the higher purpose, the goals and drive. Well, go to college, collect some points, collect some tokens, be validated. If there's anything you're not validated in, it's probably not mattering, like psychology, which later proved to be one of the best couple of courses that I took. At the time, I thought, this is junk, but I've used more from my psychology courses for the rest of my life than an awful lot of disciplines, I gotta say. But anyway, so I went through college like that, and I was a wise guy. I used to be kind of sarcastic from time to time. So there I was in grad school, and I was taking an electronics course, and so I just had this token collecting school game attitude about the whole thing. And there was one point where I'd been sick for a week or something, and I was ready to flunk a oral quiz for the week on the electronics lab that we'd done that week. And I thought, this is all a game and a joke. And so what I actually did, it boggles my mind to think I used to be this juvenile instead of as juvenile as I am now. But there was an oral quiz, and there was a colleague who was sitting there asking me electronics questions. I just kind of sauntered away from the desk, laid down on a table, and said, I'm underprepared, so go ahead, put the dagger in me, but it's okay because I've earned enough points that I'll make a B anyway out of this course, even if you give me a 0. So a little later, I got a B- in the course. And I went to the professor and I said, B-, you lousy stinking SOB, check out this list in the syllabus about this and adds up and percentage, and I got a B, change the grade. And the professor said to me, after that incident with our colleague of unprofessionalism, it's a wonder that you're still here. We need to have a conversation. And my first thought was, what a crock of BS, and who do you think you are? Because I know how the school game works, and the school game says I get a B+, and you're saying I get a B-, and this is just crooked. And he didn't buy that argument, strangely. And what he said was, you don't have a purpose. I think that's one of your issues up here. He said, you're not here for a reason. You don't have any goals. You're going through motions. And until you figure out what a real purpose is, it's a serious question whether you should stay here for another semester. And so I left his office thinking, that lousy, stinking, crooked, no good, weaselly, lying, actively seek truthful feedback and use it. Damn it. Because the more I thought about what he was saying, he was so 100% right. I didn't belong in grad school at that point because I was a juvenile. And I was going through a points accumulation game because it kept me out of hunting for a real job, for gosh sakes. And I wasn't really ready to be there. And he was the guy to tell me truth. And that meant I had an opportunity to keep saying he's full of nonsense and block out the truth, or to take that truthful feedback and say, I wonder what I should do about this. So my binary of either you succeed or it doesn't matter was running up against the hard rocks of you're in grad school and you're not succeeding and you still think it matters. And as far as that goes, if it doesn't matter, you don't have a backup plan and you don't get paid next week if you don't come up with a backup. Something has to happen. This was high stakes, finally. This was no longer being a kid. You know, I got to postpone turning into an adult for longer than I should have, but this was come to terms with adulthood of truthfully seeking feedback and use it so that you can establish your visionary goals aligned with their higher purpose and have grit. And so I thought, what do I do? You know, truth is that the dabbling in research that I've been doing up to this point doesn't get me out of bed in the morning, and it's not fun. And that's why they say that I'm here. And I thought I was playing a points game, but that's not it. So something else has to be it. But you know what? I really love my teaching. I've been teaching classroom students as a TA, and I'm just so eager to get there, and it gives me such joy, and it's so rewarding. So I think I want to hang on to this higher ed idea, except that I'm not sure that this is exactly the way to do it. So what we did then is we established a plan, and we leveraged what we've got. And at that point, what I had was, I like teaching. Teaching is good. There is a junior college, a 2-year university down the road, and they hire people with master's degrees. I don't have to finish this PhD, and I don't have to turn into a research junkie at this point. And that is a way to take what I've got and a plan that works for me, that gives me some kind of reward and feels right, and package that together. So we negotiated that with my prof, and okay, so you still need to do enough research to get a thesis done at the master's level, if not a PhD. And so we worked out a plan, and when I got done with it, he said, man, this is the best master's thesis that I've seen in 20 years here. I thought, okay. He even said, actually, you know, if you'd been at some 4th-tier place like Wayne State, they'd give you a PhD for this, but this is the Big Ten, and so, and I said, I'm feeling kind of ripped off by that, but okay. It gets me my master's degree, and I go teach for a while. So I went and taught for a while, and then a little later on, I thought, for reasons with issue number 1, actually, I lived in Vincennes, Indiana. If you've ever been a single male living in Vincennes, Indiana, town of 20,000 people, none of whom are single women between the ages of 18 and 40, I thought, you know, I do have some other goals here, so I got to do something else. And so maybe I could go back to grad school and finish a PhD, but what I was doing at IU, I'm still not falling in love with some of the lab side of that. And so let's establish a plan leveraging what you've got. Well, there was this division of chemical education, which was joint between School of Ed, School of Science, faculty, shared projects, etc. And I thought, you know, what I've got to leverage is that I love being in a classroom, and they love to investigate how people learn and what can be new tools for learning instead of a new tool for measuring cadmium in mice urine or whatever. And so I thought, that's a thing where I can bring my skills to bear. So I went there, and the first thing that happened was, well, if you're in the chem department or you're in the ed department or so what we've got to do is do this thing that satisfies both sets of requirements at once. And that kind of stuff was what led to this will take 18 years to get out of here, because it was too many cooks in charge of the broth at the same time and too many bosses. And so what I needed to do is not let others hold me back. And so when they said, if you don't do enough chemistry instrumentation, we won't give you a chem degree. And so I said, well, can I get my degree out of the ed school if what I do is I create a tutorial and study it and do ed psych with it and et cetera in chemistry, and then run that with chemistry students and et cetera. And so they said, okay, well, that's not a bad plan. And of course, that required seeking an awful lot of truthful feedback, but it also took 4 versions of what I was doing. The first version of the program, I didn't know much about instructional computing, and so I had this little thing, you know, this was 1987 to 9, and so there were these molecules that were just, like he was talking about the dot printer, there were 5 dots on a screen. Does this help you understand molecules? No, it was miserable. It was dog ugly, except it was the foundation. So, okay, well then you do version number 2, and well, I don't know how to draw a CH4 molecule on an Apple computer or whatever, and no one else has yet either. But there's a guy who thinks he can show you how to do that over in the instructional computing department. Why don't you go take a course with him? And so that was a case of seeking out resources that was going to help me to do what I wanted to do and applying some grit and sticking with. So it took 4 versions of it. And it took a handful of years, and it took staying up overnight through the night, pretty much the whole 10 months or so. Well, I wasn't awake during the day, though, but I mean, before finishing. But it ended up being the sort of thing where then I was in a new position. You have a chem ed degree. You want to go teach college chemistry. You know how many places there are in the country that say, chem ed degree, what the heck is that? We never heard of that, and so you're not invited for an interview. Or else you're invited for an interview because you looked really interesting and novel and had a lot to offer, but you were always fourth on the list because we were always going to give it to a traditional guy who looked at how much zinc was in mouse urine or whatever the heck. And so, there was a whole lot of, are you going to get held back? But ESU was a place where they said, you're really interested in teaching the students and you really like the freshman level work and you really are passionate about your teaching and you want to have a scholarly life that involves your coordinating high school student teachers and publishing American Chemical Society exams and serving in that kind of way. And they said, all right, you're the fit. Well, that's why I'm here, was because of that history. And I think that to a large extent, the failures of grad school were a beautiful learning opportunity and an impetus for me to say, what are you passionate about? And if it isn't what's laying in front of you now, how are you going to find it? And once you find it, how are you going to connect the other people to it so that it actually happens? All the things that she was talking about, I think, pop out in that story. So there's a little bit about some failures that I've been through and some successes that were certainly unanticipated, if you go back enough years, that trailed out of those failures, and I think pretty well reinforce all of the ideas that the scholar of success and failure brought to our attention to start here. So there's my story, and if you want any of the other stories, me being carried off a basketball court by cheering fans, that one you're going to have to ask later, and any of the stories about failure in my love life, failure. My beautiful, charming wife told me I'm not allowed to tell those in a room full of 80 people, although if you catch me at the right time privately, I can tell you some stories. So there you go. I think I'm all set now for questions.
I was going to say, remarkably, my story of how I decided to become a professor is almost identical. It didn't happen until I was in grad school. And I think that's interesting because students always ask me, they're like, oh, when did you decide you wanted to become a physicist, whatnot? And I think they expect me to say when I was 2, and I was playing with a Newton's cradle when I was a toddler, but that isn't the case, and that isn't the case. I think that students look at the professors and professionals and think, oh, you must have known what you wanted to do before the age that you were walking or something like that, and that isn't always the case. So what I was wondering is, what advice do you give students who are afraid that they don't have that purpose yet, and they've already started down this track, regardless if they're freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, and they're like, I still don't necessarily know what I want to do. What sort of advice do you give people that are in that situation?
First thing I ask an advisee if they come in, with those same kind of concerns, is I ask, what do you love doing? And what are your hobbies? What would you do for extracurriculars? What would you do with your spare time? Who are you connected to? And those sometimes tell really, really obvious tales. So I'll just follow up with a little bit about my advising life. I have 2 advisees that have their names on the Walk of Fame out front. Both of them were people whose parents had told them, instead of being an engineer, you've got to be a secondary ed chem teacher. They're guaranteed jobs. They make a safe living. Go see Michael Doherty and become a secondary ed teacher. And they were miserable. And they hated it. And they weren't doing homework. And they were flunking. And they were my advisees, so they came into my office and, in tears, what do I do? And I hate this, it's miserable. And I asked, what do you love doing? One of them loved writing. And she was taking extra English courses because she loved writing. And I said, why aren't you majoring in that? And she said, well, because my parents and my guidance counselor said I had to. And I said, your parents, your guidance counselor, can I talk to your parents? Because if you love writing and you hate chemistry, then trying to lock yourself into doing the rest of your life teaching a thing you hate to a bunch of other students that are going to be miserable from the experience, probably a bad choice. And one of them actually became a theater major. Well, she'd already been in 3 plays by the time we had this conversation. And so in both cases, they put me on the phone to their parents and, can we make a deal and let me discuss, and are you aware that your son, daughter, et cetera? And so reflecting on what it is that you love, I loved teaching. I knew that when I was getting thrown out of grad school. And how can I make teaching be a part of my life, either so that I don't get thrown out of grad school or after I get thrown out of grad school or whatever? What do you love? That came out in my conversation with my advisor. And it was a following conversation. It wasn't the first one. When he was telling me, should we throw you out, my attitude was still, you lousy SOB, I don't want to hear you. But later on, he invited me back in, and what do you love? And if that's what you love, can we make anything out of that? And so it was getting feedback from people who have an observational viewpoint that was very helpful to me.
One of the themes that I'm noticing, if I can mentally add another bullet point to this, is accepting the situation as it stands. Whether it's my fish died, I'm just collecting coins in grad school, or I'm currently not very good at writing. Every one of these stories has one of those situations. Okay, I have to step back and accept this. Now what? Really take into what the situation is and then move forward. Are there any questions that people have? Well, we can bring the whole panel back up if there's any group questions that you might have for all three.
Yes. I think it could go either way. It was funny because listening to Michael talk about the teaching piece. My very first job out of college, so I went to become a teacher because, for the same reason that the dean did, I knew I needed a job. And I was fascinated with how children learned and cognitive development and that sort of thing, but I didn't even know that sort of thing existed. So I became a teacher. My first job was with juvenile delinquents. And it was awful. And I was kind of fired. And I didn't make a difference. And it messed with my head. And so while I just turned 22 and thought that my life was over, literally thought that my life was over. But I had to do something, so I substitute taught and enjoyed that. But then I got a job in a prison. And it was while I was in the prison that I started to better understand what was going on with the juvenile delinquents and what was going on with the prisoners and helping them learn how to read and how to write and that sort of thing. And it was at that particular point that I realized I needed to figure out a way to make people learn better. And at that point, my purpose really came clear. And when I went to graduate school to get my PhD in cognitive development, I was hoping that I could become a professor. Everybody said, you'll never become a professor. Nobody's ever going to hire you as a professor. But I was hoping I'd be able to become a professor. But I really was looking in that very, very pragmatic kind of component of how do we help people be successful so that they don't end up as juvenile delinquents, so they don't end up in prison, so that they can go on and be successful people. And so it's an elevated purpose that's very pragmatic in nature. So can it be objective? Absolutely. Can it be subjective? Absolutely.
I don't know how to word this question really well, so I'm going to try my best. I think I'm going to include myself when I say some students. Some students, I think, have a general idea of what their higher purpose is. Mm-hmm. And then have okay, I can do A, B, and C. I can go to this graduate school. I can go to this track. And this is a question open to everyone. I didn't say that. But is there a correlation between like successful people and like the timeline it takes them to achieve their higher purpose based off like multiple goals?
No. 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 There isn't a point when everything just goes like, okay, you're done. You're too old to be successful. And but we do know that there's an awful lot of stress that comes from when you think that you're off the timeline of what everybody else should be doing. And there's an awful lot of stress. And that's one of the things that successful people don't let other people hold them back. That includes yourself, right? And includes when you're sitting there going, wait a minute, everybody else has a house, everybody else is established, and I'm not there yet. So no, there isn't any indication. There are a couple of fields based on cognitive development that you really need to do young. But those couple of fields where the working memory seems to actually become more rigid and it limits your success afterwards, except for those couple of fields, almost everything else, the older you get, the more likely you are to be successful in it. So waiting is okay.
Yes, Dr. Breed.
Hi.
As a graduate from military basic training, I've noticed that as time went on, I stopped using grit and started using more of just going through the motions. I would like to know, what do you consider the key difference between the two? Because clearly, as you saw from the third speaker, you can still be very successful by going through the motions.
Well, so there's a saying in my lab, fake it till you make it. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just go through the motions till you can get to that next place where you can take off. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be successful. But if you don't feel like you have that drive, spend some time reflecting to figure out why. The example that Dr. Doherty said was a perfect one. He had to spend time reflecting, that metacognition, and realizing, I love teaching, right? But nobody can pull that out for you. You have to pull that out for yourself. But it is okay. In times in your life, there will be times when you're just going to have to fake it till you make it. You just have to go through the motions to get to that next level. But do spend some time being reflective. Does that help? Okay.
Speaking on that, though, I would say that is part of grit. All right? Because like them, I had 3 years worth of hard work, books of data that said nothing. Mm-hmm. So I'm standing there going, what do I do? Now, I didn't go backwards, I didn't quit, but I just had to go through the motions for a while. Come into work, or come into the lab, do this, but then start to query things, to push things some. And all of a sudden, boom, here was this track that I went down, I had my PhD, all the work was done in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I took down a researcher at the NIH. I proved that his work was wrong. All right? And I thought, this is a big feather in my cap. But there was a while there where I'm just standing there like, I don't know what to do. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going back. All right? But I had to stand there. And sometimes that is grit, just to go through the motion stuff.
Yeah.
You got to fake it so that things will come to you so you can make it. So
Yeah.
that's part of grit, I think.
That is a great example. That reminds me, though, when I was in graduate school, so I've always studied patterns of human behavior, right? That's what I do. And when I was in graduate school, I noticed a lot of people were being asked to leave. Other people who were being successful, they always went through these periods of dry spells where they were just kind of going through the motions. And I definitely saw that in the doctoral program that I was in, and I've seen that in other programs where people go through dry spells, but you have to just keep on going. By the way, that's when I had my children during my 2 dry spells, so I wasn't going to be doing anything anyway. I figured I might as well gestate and have a couple children. So, So yes, I worked that out, good.
And as far as dry spells go, I had a colleague when I was at Purdue who said that she could identify crazy people because those were people in doctoral programs that had not yet been to the counseling center because of their dry spell. So it's pretty much a universal component of professionalizing in that way. And people who go to med school and law school and et cetera bump into similar kinds of grind through. So lots of domains, what you're talking about is a piece of reaching a goal. And then when you get to the end of that, new choices. You know, if you go to law school, well, do I go corporate? Do I go clerking for somebody? Do I, new choices present themselves so as to allow your passion to blossom. And the same is true in grad school.
No, that's true. We have a variable that we just designed a measure for and validated maybe about a year or so ago. We're working on trying to get it published, but we'll see when that happens. But it's 3 items on help-seeking behavior. And what we found is that about 14% of the variance of a student's GPA is related to their help-seeking behavior. So this idea of seeking help, which includes making use of your faculty, making use of the tutoring center, making use of your peers, making use of the counseling center, making use of the resources, right? Leveraging what you've got. And so when you do find yourself in those periods of dry spells, that also is an avenue.
I was going to play off something Michael said. I think it goes back to what the young lady in the back said too. When you talked about students often get to this position when you're graduating. Do I go to grad school? Do I get a job? What do I do next? There's 2 things. These are going to sound like platitudes. Every time somebody older says something to a younger person, it sounds like, yeah, it's easy for you to say. But we've all been there. That's the difference. One is do a gut check. Go with what your gut, you probably at some level have a conflict between, well, I know I maybe should do this, I'm not sure what I should do that. What is your gut telling you to do? And if you've got nothing else to go on, go with your gut. And the second thing is, you know that poem by Robert Frost, Two Roads, Diverge in Yellow Woods? It's my favorite poem, and he talks in there about a way, once you pick a way, it leads on to another way, and I chose the road less traveled by, that's made all the difference. If you get to that point, you just make a choice. And whatever you choose, it's going to be the right one. Ultimately, it's going to be the one that you look back and say, if I didn't do that, let's take it to an extreme. If my fish didn't die of smoke inhalation, I wouldn't have my daughter. Because I wouldn't have gone to Japan, I wouldn't have done all these things, I wouldn't have met my wife, she wouldn't exist. I can't stand that idea. So whatever choices I made, those are the right choices. But you're in there, you struggle with it. Just let your gut tell you what to do.
What is your view on law of attraction?
What is my...
What is your opinion on law of attraction? Do you believe in that?
Actually, research on attraction is a little outside of my area of expertise. I work in the area of cognitive development. But there is some really interesting research that I have seen on attraction that helps, that can be statistically modeled and be predictive. So, but it's definitely outside of my area of research. Oh, but Dr. Baburka has done research in the psychology department in that area of relationships and attraction. And Dr. Kusid's done a little bit of that, but in a different way. So they're definitely good resources to go see and talk to.
I've read things about all these successful people, and it does connect how you think, and what you put out in the universe and how.
Okay. So I definitely think surrounding yourself with people who are going to help move you forward is a good idea. So in my research team, I will get rid of an undergraduate, we don't have graduate students, an undergraduate student like this if I see any form of passive aggressive behavior or anything that's not uplifting. It's like we're all for one and one for all, kind of. And it doesn't mean that you have to like everybody or get along, but I do think that one of the best things about being a full professor, unlike our untenured colleague, Dr. Ross, is you get to say, yes, I'm going to be on this committee, or no, I'm not going to be on this committee. And I only say yes when I get to be around people who are interested in everybody being successful. And so I would definitely encourage you to seek that out as a way to move forward.
Just wanted to add a comment on sort of the theme of this gathering about failure. Nobody wants to be pro-failure. and on Facebook, nobody mentions the failure.
Right.
You don't get a picture of, I tried to make this cake and this is what I got.
This is what happened, right.
And I blew all the money that I had, and this is an important, so this has been a total disaster.
Right.
But, so we hide that. What was so nice, I think, about what we heard today was people telling their story. And a human life really is not a series of successes where you matriculate according to somebody else's timetable. It's a messy business with ups and downs. But sort of the thing that buoyed everybody was to finally say, never mind what somebody else is telling me.
Right.
What am I telling me that matters to me? And as you say, trust your instinct with that. And try to. We hardly ever have anybody saying, ignore the TV commercials, they're all lies. Life doesn't look like that. Ignore Facebook, it's all lies. It's fake book. Start to tell our real stories of who you are and what it is you really want to do and how it is that I can accept the possibility of trying something and it doesn't work out. And that's okay. What matters is what I do with that.
Right. Absolutely.
I do have that cake on my Facebook page.
I saw it.
And I have the lemon rice brick on my Facebook page, too.
I think we run out of time though, so, but if you guys want to talk to them, you guys can be out here in the lobby for just a little bit. So let's give our speakers a big hand.